Like we refer to these passes as like balance passes, and we're like always trying to quote unquote like balance the game. But I think a better term and like a better language for what we're actually trying to do is tuning. So we kind of consider it more of like a tuning pass as opposed to a balance pass. I think the term balance has some implications in there that we're intentionally seeking out this like very flat level world where there's always like a perfect counter and that all the DPS is perfectly equalized across all the weapons and grenades and everything. And that's not entirely the case. I mean, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad thing and that games that do that are doing it wrong. But I would say like what we're actually trying to do is tune the game. So we're kind of stepping in. We're looking at data. We're looking at anecdotal experiences. We're reacting to our own experiences playing the game. And we can see when like certain weapons are really hot and need to come down a little bit. Certain weapons are not performing well and need to come up a little bit. And it's more of just like a knob twiddling. But like that term also sounds like it's kind of like aloof and like whatever. But it's pretty targeted. But yeah, the end goal is not like perfect balance. The goal is to, as we said before, is like we want to create options for players. We want players to feel like they have a whole range of options in their arsenal that they can create a build out of and take that in, and that's going to reflect a play style that they have, or the sort of like a specific like gameplay or emotional fantasy that they're trying to act out. That makes sense.
So diversity.
Just to clarify, I know we've talked about sort of the process of doing these tuning passes before, but just to recap it, if I understand correctly, John, you sit down and you type up those notes of all the changes that you're going to make. You hand them to Greg and Grant, and they make all the changes, and then it goes out. And
yeah, basically how it actually works is Deej makes a bunch of promises on a live stream, and then we have to deliver.
You sit there and watch, going, "Oh no, don't say that." Oh, okay.
Yeah,
got to do it now.
No, I mean it's a whole bunch of stuff. But basically, when we sit down, we start to do a tuning pass. It's like the whole design team will get together and we'll be like, we'll look at data. We'll talk about how it is to play in the real game. We'll go to forums. We'll read forums. We'll watch streams. Sort of like this process of like gathering data and gathering experiences, and then sort of like doing a targeted look at like, okay, all the broad strokes, like weapon archetypes, subclasses, like what do we want to do, if anything, about these? And then it's like, okay, and now we'll start to dig into the weeds of like, okay, nobody uses this perk, or like I actually like have seen a specific like Reddit thread pop up a week ago about like how useless this perk is. Like maybe we should look at that or something like that. I don't know. So.
And then we get into like a 3-hour argument about Arcblade.
Yeah.
So okay, so you've done, you've taken sort of a first pass at it. You do a little testing or whatever. How many times would you say you kind of do the testing, come back and tweak it? How many of those do you do for every one that we end up seeing?
Constantly. It's a daily process. So when we start one, we do our initial round of changes, and then we play test the game every single day and make new changes based on that play test. And this is the type of thing that like our design group, we drive our producers up the wall, because they like the production team constantly wants us to be able to like quantify how much time it's going to take to do a thing or like make a thing. And our answer is always literally as much time as you will give us. Like we keep tuning and tweaking, and I don't think there's ever been a tuning pass where we come to the end and we put our pencils down and go, yeah, pretty good. I think we're done, right? It's like it's always up until the very last day, and I'm like arguing with testers and producers. It's like, okay, one more thing. I just have to get this one thing in. Like it's pretty intense, like rapid iteration, and on a daily basis we are playtesting our stuff for the course of usually an hour, like 50 to 60 minutes, and then it's a long feedback session after the playtest where we're all talking about how things are working and what we should do next.
And then just repeat that process over and over and over again.
Yeah, literally every day until they lock us out. The cadence of releases of when we push stuff out into the game, like we have to be done like in a matter of weeks before it even goes live. Mm-hmm. So, and if we're going to have enough time, that means we need to get a good head start on that. But usually like the cadence with how it goes is like the patch goes out, and then like 2 or 3 weeks later, production is like, hey, you guys ready to start your next tuning pass? And we're like, no. Like, no one even knows how to use the new stuff. Like, we haven't even seen the data settle. Like, we don't even know what the new patterns are. Like, everything's still noisy. Like, we still have a lot of noise in the data and with people's experiences. It a lot of times, too, it depends on the focus of the playtest. So when we're looking at specifically just a tuning pass and like just the sandbox stuff, we actually like to have a good control case. So we'll stay on one map. And it's usually a map that we feel pretty good about that has a lot of like combat options and different optimal ranges and like
what?
I would say Rusted Lands is probably our best test bed for tuning passes. The reason for that is I think we may have mentioned this before in other podcasts, but so this is a little bit of like Bungie Destiny trivia. But Rusted Lands was the first PvP map that was ever built for Destiny. And as a result, that map got so much iteration over the course of the development cycle that it seriously has had the most polish of any of the ship maps we've ever done. And so I feel like that map really plays really well because of that. And so when we're doing a targeted playtest on just sandbox stuff, where like the PvP team doesn't need to look at a new mode or they don't need to look at a new map that's in progress, and they're okay with us doing like a very focused sandbox test. We usually opt for Rusted Lands just because we're so comfortable with it, and it got like every little nook and cranny and sightline of that map got a lot of attention from the design team early on. Over the course of a playtest, if we're not specifically focusing on one map, we'll get enough map rotation in where we can get a pretty good feel for how a different archetype is playing at different ranges and in different situations.
Grant, I wanted to ask you something. You had a comment in the This Week at Bungie where you were saying something about how you couldn't just keep buffing everything forever.
Right.
Could you justify that? Because you've ruined all of my favorite things.
Wow. Okay. So this time it's personal.
Yeah. No, just give me a bit of insight into kind of the levers you have to pull to make these changes.
If all we ever did was sort of turn the dial up, everything would be 11 eventually. And we're not like really comfortable with where the pace of the game might end up at that point. So like we don't want to be a game where you come around the corner and get shot in the knee and are instantly killed without really having any understanding of what happened to you or why it happened to you or any sort of chance to respond to it. I advocate slowing things down to some extent just for the sake of clarity of encounter.
Yeah, that's definitely we wanted to ask some direct community questions, but I think we'd have to credit half the population to ask about game speed. It's definitely something that I feel some type of way about. One thing that really gets narrowed in on when people are discussing game speed, and maybe Greg or John could answer this, but also I guess in terms of some subclass perks, is kill speed and more specifically primary engagements. Because as it stands, you've got, in quotes, insta-kill special weapons, like sniping someone and having them immediately die, versus primaries, which, as we've seen throughout the course of Destiny, primary time to kill has slowed quite a bit. I guess if I'm looking at something like auto rifles versus, my year one Vanquisher back in December, or Doctrine of Pass and where it is now. How do you guys feel about primaries, the speed they kill, and how they play against other weapons?
I guess like taking it a step up real quick and talking about kill speed. So I think in the world where it's pretty fast to kill somebody, like your time to kill is pretty quick, you have a lot more leverage. It can be way more forgiving on the sandbox and the mechanics to have power spikes because everything is strong. And then the more you increase the time to kill and slow things down and get into what Grant was talking about with like understanding what is coming at you, that puts a lot more pressure on the gameplay mechanics to feel fair and feel like there are counters and feel like you don't have a bunch of like quote unquote insta kills coming at you at every second of the game. And so specifically talking about primaries versus specials, we don't want that time to kill to be super fast. Also because they're meant to be so like omni-situational. Like I can use them up against a variety of enemies in different combat scenarios. Whereas the special weapons, like I think I've said this on the show before, but like you have to remember that like the goal of the special weapon is right there in the title. It's special, right? It's a special case. So shotguns are all about closing on guys. Snipers are all about, long range shooting and getting a precision headshot. And basically lethality on those weapons are ratcheted up to reward that skill.
One thing that I guess I think about when hearing you talk about that, and you guys are probably well aware of, is that even with, a gun having the same theoretical time to kill under all circumstances, time to kill can feel a lot different when you're playing something like Rumble or Skirmish versus playing Sixes. Like that sort of chaotic aspect of Sixes where TTK doesn't matter because there's 3 people shooting you at the same time. Or, it exaggerates some of those effects just based off of, what playlist you're in.
Yeah, definitely. And another interesting aspect to think about with time to kill is that the faster it is to kill somebody, the more you sort of imply and emphasize a lone wolf playstyle, where it's on the flip end. If you start to slow it down, it starts to emphasize the team play, right? Where it's like if you try to go out on your own and take on another team, like you do some like crazy like flank route and trials, like you have to be really, really good if you're going to take on like a 1v2 or a 1v3. And then you're going to be way more effective if you're working with your team and coordinating with your team. A big thing that I'm always thinking about that I desperately want to make improvements on in the game is, and this is a level above just weapons, but just in general, is predictability of combat, of like looking out at the enemies that you're up against and the situations that you're in and sort of like the area of a map that you're in, and having a better idea of how to move through there and sort of picking your mental path before you commit to it. And that obviously that is the entire Crucible, right? Like that's everything from map design to subclasses to weapons to like damage feedback to like, enemy silhouettes, like all that kind of stuff. But for me, that's a huge part of like improvements that I want to make. Like there's a seed in there that like a lot of the things I want to do when I talk about a change I want to make to the game, that's at the core. I just want to improve the predictability of combat, of like what you could be up against in any given moment. Because right now it's pretty noisy.
Since we're on the broad side of things right now, our one friend Anklet asks, what is one aspect of the game that you spent a lot of time and effort on that people don't know you did or didn't notice in the final product?
I'm really proud of, we did like a really neat thing with sort of the blink technology and trying to visit your intentions with where the reticle was pointing and how it would like blink based on your aim or based on your momentum, but try to take like a sort of the difference between the two. If you were like floating through the air in one direction, but like really hard throttling left, it would try to push the blink to somewhere that was very intuitive between that. And I spent way too much time on it and was super proud of it. And I don't think anyone really notices.
I sit next to you. I didn't know you did that.
Oh, come on.
Also, to speak on Greg's behalf, when we were finishing up Taken King, I think he took sidearms under his wing for a little bit, and he smoothed out a bunch of the recoil when you're like spam firing a sidearm. Greg did a bunch of really good work to make that recoil like really read and translate well. And I don't think like that's a thing that just people take for granted because it feels sweet to use, but like
I get it.
I don't think they realize.
And they never got to see it before.
Right. Yeah.
What was the hardest change you had to make in the name of balance? A certain weapon that you loved or thought was fine as is, or maybe a subclass that was harder to get in line with the others?
Trip mines were that was definitively the hardest change that I've ever made. Gunslingers were getting more kills from trip mines than warlocks were getting from firebolts, and they have a super about their grenades. Yep. So a change had to be made, and there was like a lot of roundabout discussion and feminine arguing. And I like to tell myself that I play all of the classes equal and don't favor any of them, but I'm kind of a gunslinger at heart. So it was pretty rough. We thought a lot about the trip mine and how it was fulfilling, just too many roles. And now sort of thinking of it as like a well-placed trap that you have to think about to cover like a sniper lane or something while you're not paying attention. And the incendiary being the more aggressive option, and the swarm, like I kind of think of that one as a sort of last minute trap. Like I know they're going to chase me through this door, so I put it put it like right in front of me as I turn a corner, and they eat every last bee and that kind of thing. But like the philosophy on selecting grenades for any given class is different. So you can't always extrapolate out from that. We talk a lot about like emotional and mechanical fantasies in the sandbox, and the grenade selection for any given subclass generally starts with more of an emotional fantasy standpoint.
John, for this question of what was the hardest to change, can you just tell me it was Icebreaker so that I can have some closure?
Close.
He laughed goofily, I gotta tell you.
Yeah. No, Bones, when I was changing Icebreaker, I knew it was going to hurt you. So that was
it's so
great
deeply.
For me, it was definitely the Black Spindle. Changing that perk to pull from your mag instead of giving you a free bullet. We had a specific purpose in mind for that sniper. So like for the Crotawade, when we made that weapon set, I worked pretty closely with the raid design team, specifically Stuart Monsk. He's an awesome designer. We actually we crafted a whole set of roles for each weapon in that set of raid weapons. So like, for example, like the scout rifle had the target highlight. And so we were thinking, okay, the scout rifle is for the raid leader in the party. And they're the guy who is like sort of directing people. And so we wanted his gun to highlight enemies so he could call out like which guys to focus fire on. And so the sniper rifle, the whole point of that perk was it was going to be for the person who's going to manage the Boomer Knights at the final Crota encounter. And so basically the idea was like if you had this sniper rifle and you could keep landing headshots on those dudes, you could effectively take out that wave without having to reload and free up the battlefield for your team to push on Crota.
You've said in the past that you like when guns, evoke a sense of power in your hands, but I knew that when I ran a Nightfall on Devil's Lair and I had my black hammer, you jump up on a wall right when you come out the door to that big open area with the walker. You jump on this pipe on the wall miles from the encounter and you just shoot the walker. Yep. You don't even have to descope if you do it right. And that's when I noticed, this may be a little strong. I'm to blame, but that's where I could tell.
Even some of those you can't see it right away what the whole effect. Even with like Noosk's Black Spindle example, I'm sure it wasn't anticipated that would just become the boss slayer. It like had a very cool purpose and everything, and you can start with that purpose and not realize that what you're doing is offering someone a tool for a totally different puzzle that you didn't realize they were going to solve with that tool. And then they just wreck everything forever, and you're sad. So,
Well, here's a question to spin us. Maybe we'll get a little fun now that we were just talking about the sad parts. This is a question from our most recent guest, Keen Koala, and he asks this to Grant. And he's wondering, what are some subclass elements that you would like to see implemented into the game? What sort of abilities do you think would be cool to integrate into that new element? For example, something like Frost or Toxic, whatever that means.
Heart. We still have a lot of space to explore with Void Solar and Arc. I don't know that we need to go in any sort of divergent direction just yet.